Hey, everybody, good evening and welcome to World Bible School Media. I'm your host, Dr. Bill Hanshew, and you are watching Kingdom Dynamics. This program, we bring you kingdom truths of supernatural realities that are awakening within the minds of men and women all over the world. And I believe what we're doing is raising the awareness of our Christ mind within. Welcome to the show tonight. Want to say real quickly by way of announcements. One, if you're wondering why I play that approximately 1 minute of music before we get started, is because it takes me that long to get everything set up and ready to go once we're live. And then two, I hope that you are watching and enjoying the television show. I just posted episode 98, which just aired at 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time this evening. In about 6 more episodes, I will be leaving the Grace Awakening Network and doing this on my own. I'll be continuing with World Bible School Media as my launch, and I'm getting way more feedback and results there. And so condemnation anywhere, but it's just going to work out better for me, and I won't have to pay that television fee every month anyway. So, having said that, thank you everyone for joining us. Back with me is Dr. Michael Whitmire, and I love this brother. He is our Director of Leadership in World Bible School University, and one of our professors as well. And in addition to his responsibilities as a husband and a father and pastor of a good-sized congregation with a lot going on. Dr. Michael, welcome back to the show. I'm so glad to have you in 2026. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dr. Bill. It's an honor to be with you always. And thank you for allowing me to be part of this evening, and looking forward to being always a part of the ministry in any capacity. So I appreciate the opportunity and thank you so much.
You are most welcome, and it's definitely a delight to have you. I love talking about leadership scenarios with you and some of the things that you deal with on a regular basis, and that I also have dealt with in pastoring and still deal with today in various leadership venues in our multiplicity of ministry ventures. Good to see Pastor Tarzi Martin watching tonight. Love you, my brother. And he is a pastor of 2 groups in the Borneo Islands and Malaysia area. And I'm looking forward to hopefully getting him involved in a lot more stuff as we go along in 2026. Well, we are talking about, and I just really couldn't come up with a title because it can only fit so much into an advertisement on Facebook. But so I just posed the question: have you misunderstood your calling? And I think that's a great question because so many people don't realize what their calling is and how to really embrace their calling because they're conflicted about so many other things. And I'll be honest with you, I was raised in ministry my entire life. I was probably 9 years old when my dad was pastoring his first church, and an evangelist at the same time, and even prior to that. And I was probably in kindergarten, maybe first grade, entering his junior boys Sunday school class. And so it's just been ministry here and there all of my life. And I've seen the highs and lows, the ups and downs, the why this and why that, and why it's not working and shouldn't it be different. We've dealt with all of that stuff, and so tonight we're looking at another. And you watching tonight may not think this would be necessarily your cup of tea, but I already believe that some lives are going to be impacted tonight in this broadcast because we're going to be talking about the full time ministry versus bivocational ministry, and even bivocational ministry kind of brings up other layers of this. But here's the thing: I just wrote this piece to introduce this topic. Men and women today are called by God. That should be an exclamation point like three times over there. And of course, the byline would be whether full time or bivocational. Now, I wanted to preface this. I've served in full time ministry. I've served in part-time ministry, even where I worked a full-time job. And back in the day, it was building custom homes and apartments. And about 30 years of my 40 years were spent in some construction venture, even having my own woodworking business back in the day. While pastoring at nights, I remember driving a good length to the job in the morning and back that night, and being on the cell phone with parishioners and trying to work through some stuff. Here's the thing: it never changed my calling. And my value never decreased. A job didn't define my ministry because my identity was always in Christ. And I think that's something that we really need to hit on. The fact is this: that in the above statement that I just made, it dismantles the false hierarchy that people place on ministry roles, and affirms the truth about one's calling as rooted in identity and not in ministry, employment, or your employment status. Now, here's the thing. A lot of us have tried to, and I know this, Dr. Michael, as we get into this tonight, when I uh, when I was no longer physically capable of pastoring and being the guy that was at the hospital at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and not really having an associate that I could send there and that sort of thing, although I did have associates periodically and sometimes several. But what I found is that my identity was more in the pulpit than it was in Christ, or my ability just to minister as I could. And that really became disheartening for me. And so living behind the camera is where I've been the last 10 years. Matter of fact, December the 28th, I hit the mark of 10 years of broadcasting. And, I was there when pastors were going through COVID, and the government said you can't meet in your buildings. And, they wondered, what are we going to do? How are we going to make it? And I would tell them, hey, guys, look, no, you need to be discouraged. Get behind the camera, get on Facebook, invite your congregation to watch, minister to them. And you can even tell them where they can send their finances to help keep the power on, and so on. I think it took a while for me to actually begin to identify with my identity in Christ instead of my ability to be in the pulpit. Here's a verse of scripture that I think that we've talked about in terms of messaging back and forth and realizing that about this show. Let me see here, as I think this is important, and that is in Colossians chapter 3, verse 23 and 24. And I know you're going to talk about this and some statistics tonight that are going to be great. It says, and whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men. I think the King James just clearly says unto the Lord as opposed to the Lord. And then verse 24 says, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ. I think that's so important to understand who you serve. Dr. Michael, you made a statement. You said an article published by Pastoral Care Incorporated, and according to Ed Steitzler, Vice President of Research and Statistics at Lifeway Christian Resources, tells us that 50% of ministers leave the ministry in the first 5 years, and only 1 out of 10 ministers will retire as a minister.
Yeah.
More pastors are becoming bivocational. I think that the reality is that finances have dried up. People have quit supporting ministries. And so, would you just share with our viewers what you've discovered and some information that maybe we could help them with so they would be encouraged when full time ministry just isn't cutting it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you again for the opportunity. Today, I've like you, I have experienced bivocational ministry and full-time ministry as well. When I worked at the bank for 38 years, Dr.
Mm-hmm.
Bill, I started preaching in 2010. Actually, started pastoring a church in 2010
Mm-hmm.
while working bivocational. It was those times where, I was working from 7 in the morning till probably 7, sometimes 8 in the evening, going in doing messages, getting a bite of dinner, going on, resting for a few moments and getting my thoughts together and going back and doing messages at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah.
sometimes getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, going to hospitals and, 40 miles away and visiting people that were sick and hurting and having surgery, and then back to work at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning for another full day. And it just really began to take a toll mentally and physically upon your body.
It does.
And and so I've experienced that and I've lived that. And when I look at some of these statistics through pastoral care and the Fuller Institute and some of these places, Lifeway and the Scheffler Institute and George
Mm-hmm.
Barna, I look at some of these statistics and it's really almost heartbreaking in a way to understand that in like 2025, a year ago, last year, they were estimating that nearly 15,000 churches would close across America. And
Right.
likewise, 15,000 churches were no longer paying full-time pastors because finances had dried up from, people not attending church or the loss of job or whatever it may be. And those struggles are real. Not only does that pastor, whether full-time or bivocational, not only do they have the struggles, of ministry itself, the struggles may differ a bit,
Mm-hmm.
but the struggles are still real at the end of the day.
Yes.
And I believe that today that there's a unique tension, I believe, on many leaders and many preachers and pastors today that they feel. And it's not a tension of a calling, but I believe it's a tension of the tension of capacity. Not enough hours a day, struggling with funding, whatever it may be. And I believe that we stand in a generation today that really demands, spiritual leadership and they should, and where that has increased and people have gone to trainings and schools and, all these things are help motivate us and push us forward and give us the hope that we really need, right? At the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day, but most of all through Christ, of course. But the structures that once guaranteed, full-time ministry, that support has shifted. And it's shifted now where more are becoming bivocational. There are many, I think, many reasons for that. Some are, of course, funding, job loss, whatever it may be. People just taking on a new approach to giving or not giving at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes, if we're not real careful in America, I believe unless this thing shifts somewhere along the way, I believe in, 8, 10 years down the road, if we're not really careful in America, we may not think this, but I believe if we're not really careful, that we're headed to a post-Christian society. People are not attending church anymore. They're not going to the brick and mortar anymore. And all these things are happening. And I think that's part of the reason sometimes that our churches are closing. It used to be when you and I probably were in ministry years and years ago, when my dad pastored, you know, back then, 30, 40 years ago, Dr. Bill was more about the command and control approach, meaning that, he didn't
Yep.
have a whole lot of help and the pastor did basically everything. But
Yep.
now in the 21st century and beyond, I don't think it can be that way. I think we have to be more collaborative in our approach. We have to be
Yep.
more team oriented in our approach, taking people on that journey with us. But somehow we've equated it in ministry too often, I believe, that we look at someone that's bivocational And we think that calling is a lesser of a calling, and it really isn't a lesser of a calling. It
That's
may
right.
differ in the approach, but the calling is the same, where it's, bivocational or full-time ministry. The calling doesn't change. People's view may change, but the
Hmm.
calling doesn't change. How we get there and approach may change. But I look at that because I've worked bivocational and I'm of course full time now, but I've worked on both sides of that. And at the end of the day, my calling didn't change. People's perspective of me may have changed one way or the other, but at the end of the day, my calling hadn't changed. And
Hmm.
I appreciate what you said there in the opening remarks about keeping our eyes focused upon Christ, because at the end of the day, we got to forget about these nuances and all the chatter and all the distractions that are around us as ministers, because what that does, it provides no hope for many ministers, because somehow they've got in their mind, because of a mindset that many, not everybody, but many portray today, even in the church environment. And I could name you two handfuls right now almost, that believe if you're part-time or you're bivocational, that somehow you're not a preacher, you're not a minister, you're not sharing the
Yeah.
gospel, or your calling is a less calling. And it's being bivocational is not the result of a weak calling or even a lack of faith, as some would have us to believe. But it's a calling that God has designated for us. And
Yeah.
how I look at that when I worked bivocational and I was ministering basically full time as well, as far as the church and the responsibilities goes, I was still full time. I may not have been full time in pay, or I may not have been full time in compensation, but I was full
Hmm.
time in ministry.
Hmm.
I was
Hmm.
totally into the ministry, and having to do those two jobs, it was difficult. And I don't care who we are. Eventually, we get tired, and our mind gets tired, and the struggles set in, and all of a sudden, we become isolated. And that's not a place that ministers should be, in isolation. And
That's right.
now over half in 2025, over half of the churches in America, as statistics that we've read through pastoral care, talk about, over half of the churches cannot even afford to pay, their pastor a full-time salary, and maybe not even a part-time salary. And
Yeah.
so, and when I worked bivocational for a while, I didn't take a penny. I took over a little church that had 8 members that had zero money, that we had to come to find out from a former pastor. We had a $10,000 overdraft loan that I knew nothing about when I took over the church,
Yeah.
because they had written so many checks, they had overdrawn, and they made us what they call a fresh start loan. I had no idea, that even existed until later when I'm there, and then I'm faced with it. And so, so I took over a church that was struggling. I didn't take anything. I was working full time, and the Lord was blessing me and making compensation. So I gave back into the church. But you know what? I still pastored that church, Dr. Bill, despite what everybody said. Well, you're just part time, you're just bivocational. Well, this really wasn't true. My calling didn't change, and the calling God had placed upon my life, was still the same. It didn't change.
Right.
And, I pastored that church as though I was full time, and I was full time in the ministry, but, at the end of the day, I just think we got to do the right things for the right reasons. I can get
That's
up
right.
and you got to do the right things for the right reasons. You got to do it out of passion, not obligation. I can get
That's
up and
right.
preach on Sundays and do the right thing, but if I preach because I'm getting paid to do it, then to me that
Come
becomes
on.
an obligation, not passion. And so, I got to
Yeah.
be able to get up and preach with passion, not obligation. And
Yeah.
so I never looked at it from a viewpoint of compensation. I looked at it from the point of calling. So, what I would say to ministers and pastors today, those people that have degraded bivocational ministry or put limits on bivocational ministry, I would say don't look at the compensation piece of it, look at the ministry piece of it, because
Yeah.
the altar doesn't change. The ministry, the word of God doesn't change. The calling doesn't change. And at the end of the day, we might have to rise up early for work. But you know what? I looked at that when I was bivocational as though God just entrusted me more with stewardship. And
Yes.
it was teaching me lessons back then that that is vital for me today. And likewise, there's bivocational ministers that thinks cause you're full time that you're always suspicious you do nothing. But see, it
Yeah.
doesn't
Yeah.
change. The calling doesn't change whether you're bivocational or full time. That's just what I think and believe, Dr. Bill. And I believe
Yeah.
those tensions are so real that it puts labels upon ministers, and all of a sudden, ministers often feel alone because statistics even show, Dr. Bill, that a high percentage of ministers and pastors do not even have one mentor to even talk to, not
Yeah.
one person they can
Yeah.
share, and not one person they can confide in to help them. And they're facing all these struggles by themselves. And on top of that, we got people saying, well, because you're full time, you're under suspicion, or if you're bivocational, you're sort of part time minister. I was never a part time minister. I was
No.
always full time in the ministry.
Yeah.
And so I think we got to learn to channel that and be aware. It goes back to self-awareness, I believe, is no leadership concept. We got to be self-aware of what we are, who we are.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
labels don't really matter to me, so
Yeah, and you triggered a thought in me as you were talking. During the 3 years, 30 years ago, when I was bedfast, I got to where I could be out of bed about 6 hours a day at the most before I had surgery. And anyway, I was never. That was. Let me just say it this way: I was always full time in the ministry. I remember particularly men, but people would come over to the house during my up hours, and I would mentor them.
yeah,
So you really never stop ministry. To cease from being a minister or doing ministry is really a thing in your mind. It's not a reality. Today, when I'm out 3 days a week, when I'm out in the shop, doing woodworking, I'm still in full time ministry because, for one, it's how I do business, and I'm not really in business, but it's integrity, the same integrity I would use in the ministry, and of course through the tool of the internet, smartphones, computers, and etc. You're still connected. I'm still talking to Dr. Fay. I'm still, talking to students when I need to. The point is that we never stop being called by God, whatever our calling is.
right,
And I think about this: before my wife and I were ever had a paid position, ever were senior pastors, we learned the value of volunteering our time. Now, one of the things that really helps us with WBSU is my wife and I have learned the value of volunteering during our time, whether there's compensation or not. We serve the Lord as if we're paid $1 million a day. We're
right,
giving it our all, and that's figures a little bit of an exaggeration, but we've just learned the value of giving unto the
right,
Lord. And here's another thing we'll run into, Dr. Michael, is people will say, and I've heard this before, that there's nowhere in the scriptures that ministers were actually paid to be full-time
mhm,
pastors. Let me just share with you this. I wrote an article years ago on how that Jesus had supporters in the ministry. There are places in Scripture that show that Jesus had people who regularly supported them, gave
absolutely,
of their substance to keep him full time in the ministry. Now,
absolutely,
I'm sure that the financial, the compensation was never on the forefront of the mind of Jesus. I get that,
yeah,
but I can tell you that whatever value was given to him, he was worth every penny of it. Your minister, ladies and gentlemen, is worth every dime that you can pay them, every benefit that you can give them. But if their heart's in the right place, they will minister to you, whether there's five and I've preached to five, or whether
right,
there's 50 or there's 500. They will preach. I've been in conferences, preached to 1,000 people. I mean, it really doesn't matter. They will give their all because they understand the value of the calling that's in them. So I think that's one of the first things we need to understand is that we are called by God, and we're not called by the dollar that is placed, the value of the dollar that's placed on us.
That's right. You know, in ministry, I've never looked at ministry uh, as climbing the ladder of success. I don't look at ministry that way. Christ did not climb the ladder to success, but he descended into greatness by taking on the role of a servant, correct? You know, and in fact, when you look at the scripture, he served as a carpenter probably longer than he preached the gospel and taught
Yeah.
the gospel on this earth. And so at the end of the day, you know, I wrote this down and I want to share this with you if I may, because this was transformational for me, Dr. Bill.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about bivocational and full-time ministry. Here's what I think. I put both are holy, both are honorable, both are needed. And as far as leadership goes, the question is no longer which path is superior. That's why we always want to tag everything as being superior or non superior. But the
Mm-hmm.
better question should be how do we walk faithfully in the path God has assigned for each of us? That's what
Right.
I put down for about tonight and for tonight, because at the end of the day, it is a calling of God. You know, I'm not called by my mother and my father, I'm called by God. You know, at the end of the day, I don't own the ministry in my mind. I never view it as that way. I view
Mm-hmm.
the ministry as stewardship, what God has entrusted to me. So
Mm-hmm.
whether I'm bivocational or full time, how I minister is absolutely not going to change. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to be all in or I'm going to be all out, one or the other. I can't be in between for me. And so at
Right.
the end of the day, you know, I believe that, you know, the key is not comparing the paths, but the key is walking your path well, whatever your path may be. And God
Mm-hmm.
has seasons for things. You know, listen, I led people to Christ in my office. I prayed for people in my office. I won people to Christ on the streets when I worked by vocational.
Mm-hmm.
So God entrusted me to more, you know, during those years of bivocational. And now the seasons changed. I might be in full time ministry, but as you said, and we said, the calling simply does not change,
Mm-hmm.
despite what people and the labels they want to put on us. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and we got to get away from looking at those labels because, you know, whether you're full time or part time, you both can declare, you know, you're not less called, you're not less anointed, and you're not less appointed, but you're
That's
called
right.
differently, but equally within God's divine design. And
That's
those
right.
are some notes that I made for this evening because I think that is so critical for us to understand as men and women preaching the gospel, you know, uh, and statistics will show, you know, that there's a growing number of churches without a pastor. They keep their pastor for no longer than 2 years, and it's sometimes it rotates so quickly now for various. There's so many reasons that move into that or contribute to that. But at the end of the day, you know, I just want people to know that no matter where you're bivocational, I know the struggles of bivocational ministry, or whether you're full time. You know, your calling does not change,
Yeah.
and I tell our teachers at my church, Dr. Bill, that's what I know the most about is the environment that I'm in. But I tell our teachers, you teach to that one. If you have one in that class, you teach that
That's
one
right.
like 101. You
Yes.
don't you don't pull back, you don't withhold anything. You teach that one because that one is critical. That one life that's been entrusted into your stewardship is critical through the process that we do of kingdom impact. And
Mm-hmm.
so, you know, we just got to view ministry differently. We got
Mm-hmm.
to view ministry from different realms and different views and get out of the mindset that one is superior to the other because they're really not. But forget about that. We just got to focus on the calling. That's just what I believe, you know.
There was a story Jesus told to the Jews. We have to understand that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John was primarily Jesus ministering to a Jewish mindset, bringing them out of an old covenant scenario into a more grace based scenario. And as he did, he told the story of leaving the 99 and going after the one. And I think about that a lot because when we're teaching our classes in World Bible School University, both you and I, you're the director of leadership, I'm the director of theology, and or the department head, and when we're doing that, we realize that that one student Now, of course, we don't have classes with just one in them because there's so much demand on classes. But if there was just one student, that one student would deserve everything that we can give, that we would give to 101 or to two or 300 in a class, and it wouldn't make no difference. And we've learned that value over the years, and that's one thing I believe is important about leaning on seasoned ministers. I remember when somebody said to me one time on a show, they commented in the chat room and said, "Do we all need to know Greek and Hebrew?" And my response was yes, or else get with somebody that understands Greek and Hebrew to some degree. Well, the truth is when we lean on seasoned ministers who have been there, you can take their advice, their counsel, their experience, and you can learn to avoid some potholes down the
Right.
road in your ministry that will help you greatly. And you was talking about ministers not having anybody to talk to. I want you to know this: Dr. Michael and I both have great wives. They're our best friends. They're our confidants. We get strength from them, and we can share anything with them. But at the same time, for a guy, sometimes having a male minister friend who is a mentor. I've had three spiritual fathers in my life. They're all gone now, and my dad was one of my spiritual fathers. It wasn't just my dad, but he was my spiritual father, and my spiritual fathers are gone now, and I've become a spiritual father to many around the world. What I'm saying to you is there are people we can lean on, but there are times in our lives that there was nobody it seemed like we can turn to, because one of the reasons is, and you talk about integrity, is there were times where we would share, take somebody into our confidence, and before you knew it, they were telling other people about our situation that we were trying to keep private. You have to learn who to share with, and you have to
Right.
learn what to share. But in time, I want to tell you, seasoned ministers do rise up who are mature, and for me, Dr. Michael, it seems like I've kept more secrets than the president could share.
Yeah.
But but it really is important for us to understand. Let me just throw out let me just throw out the here in. Second Thessalonians chapter 3 verse 8 and 9. I've gathered a few scriptures here. It says, nor did we eat anyone's bread free of charge, but worked with labor and toil night and day, that we might not be a burden. Think about this, that we might not be a burden um, to any of you. And then verse 9 says, uh, not because we do not have authority, meaning, is there a right to being taken care of? That's beside the point. He says, but to make ourselves an example of how you should follow us.
Yeah.
I want to tell you that anybody that understand the value of integrity and understand the value of volunteering themselves, giving of themselves in ministry, is a person that I wouldn't follow personally.
Yeah.
I think that when we learn some of the things the Apostle Paul learned, and as you see written in some of the epistles and the letters, I think Paul one time said, "Follow me as I follow Christ." If you're not following Christ, if you're not following the kind of example Christ would have given, then yeah, that's not a person you would want to follow. But here again, we're back to people leaving the ministry. Today, churches are closing. I
Yeah.
mean, especially independent churches, and probably you're a denominational bishop, and I want you to understand, I don't hang out with a lot of denominational people, I like what you have to say. I like your approach to ministry, and you and I are even somewhat of a little bit different backgrounds and different venues, and yet we've come together for a mutual purpose. I think back to Brandon Gates. I can't get Brandon
Yeah.
Gates out of my mind, which is partly responsible for you being a part
Right.
of what we do. But he said, I don't know everything. And he said, he just had saw the value in hooking up with people and learning from one another, and I so appreciated that about him, as I'm sure you did.
Yeah.
Uh, but the reality is that you know I like to help people say, okay, you're faced with this ministry problem. You're wanting to quit. You're wanting to become a part of the statistics. And here's how you can avoid that. And
That's right.
even you, as a bishop in your denomination, I know you have faced ministers who were ready to give up, and there was nobody to take the church, and ultimately churches had to be closed down.
Yeah,
And that's a hard thing to do. So yes, we need this show tonight, and we need to encourage people as to what do you do? Where do you go from here? How do you handle this problem in life instead of becoming a statistic of just quitting and giving up?
that's right. That's right. We have a I'm a district overseer as well, so I've got a group of churches that basically are under my care,
Right?
and I have pastors that deal with real life struggles. And in fact, in those statistics we were talking about earlier, Dr. Bill,
Hmm.
70%. One of the statistics is that 70% of pastors do not have someone they consider to be a close friend.
Hmm.
That's one place I would start
Hmm.
if I were struggling as a minister to find that one person. Now, you've got to be careful who speaks into your life,
That's
okay,
right.
and who you share your business with. And because, like you said earlier, everyone doesn't have the most honorable intentions. And so you have to be careful who you share. I've got 3 to 5 guys that I can call at any time. Some of them are out of state, Dr. Bill.
Hmm.
They're away from my environment. I'm away from their environment, and we can tell each other things and pray for each other. And they're not going to share anything. I'm not going to share anything they do or say, but we're
Hmm.
going to pray for each other, support each other. And if a pastor or a minister has 3 to 5 close friends that can speak into their life. Did you know that statistics show that even their life expectancy almost doubles
Oh
opposed to
yeah.
people who do not have not a single person that can speak into their life or they can speak in their life and mentor? 70% have no one they consider a close friend. And there lies the struggles. That puts you in almost a hopeless situation when you begin to think about the negativity of that. But the hope of that
Yeah.
is this is that there's always men and women out there that you can build a relationship with, that you can speak
Hmm.
to. Everybody's not bad. Everybody don't share everything. There's people out
Come
there,
on now.
yeah, it has the right intentions for the right purpose, driven like you are, situations like you are, and they too are looking for help. And you can help actually mentor each other through the process. And these 3 to 5 that I have, I've got one of these ministers that's not one of my close friends and confidants is someone that's not even a minister of the gospel, but he can speak into my life. I can speak into his life. You know why? Because we have both earned the right to speak into each other's life.
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
know we're not going to tell each other stuff and what happens, and we pray for each other, we uplift each other, we encourage each other. I'm telling you, it removes those mountains and it removes those labels. It removes those feelings of isolation and depression. I believe that often hits pastors and ministers of the gospel. So I think a good starting point for hope is to find someone. God sends someone my way that I
Hmm.
can have a close relationship with. I'm sometimes 600-700 miles from some of these preachers, but I'm a phone call away or a text away.
Hmm.
And then sometimes they'll call me and say something like this: "Hey, Mike, I just wanted to check on you today. I've had you on my mind." Or I may pick up the phone and
Amen.
call them and say, today God laid you on my heart and mind for a reason.
Hmm.
And then they begin to maybe weep and cry because they're going through situations that I didn't know,
Hmm.
but God knew. And having those people that will speak into your life is a great starting point because we do not have to face this alone. You know, the world always makes you think sometimes in the way they think about things that you got to face things alone, but that we're
Hmm.
never alone. We're never alone anyway with God. But having those 3 to 5, Jesus had those 3 to 5 real close. He had a lot of friends, but only had those 3 to 5 that was extremely close to him, and he modeled the way for that for us. And so the people are there, and those individuals are out there. Lord, just send them my way. Put me in the path of men and women that will speak into my life, that's not going to judge me, that's not going to tear me down, but yet going to uplift me.
Yeah.
and might not agree with what I do, but they're going to pray for me. They're not going to give up on me. That type of mentality, because at the end of the day, if my struggles or your struggles are real in a ministry, or anyone watching, their struggles are real in a ministry, there's a hundreds of others around us facing the same thing. And so, and they're looking for hope, looking for help. In our denomination, for example, 70% or so of our churches, our entire overall church numbers run less than 100.
Hmm.
They have no
Hmm.
associate pastors, many of them. They have no one to turn to. And so our denomination does a good job of reaching out to pastors and trying to help them through covenant groups, and things like that we do, so that we can help assist through that process, because it is a critical process. It is a tool to use against ministers, and so we just got to realize and understand that we're never alone, and a good starting place is to find those 3 to 5 that can invest in your life and that you can invest in their life. But in saying that, you have to earn the right. My
Hmm.
title doesn't give me a right to speak into someone's life. They may listen to me because they have to a little bit, but it doesn't give me the right. I haven't earned the right with them. I have to earn that integrity.
You have a congregation of around 600 members, and that could have changed since us talking last. We have a school of nearly 600 students, but that amount of people and that position that you and I are in does not give us the right to just say what we want to anybody, or to offer
No,
advice without advice being asked for.
that's right.
Um, and I think that means that there's no mind of arrogance, but there's a mind of humility and
Right.
servitude.
Right.
I remember when the statistic was that the average church in America was 30 to 50 people. Today, the average church is around 60 to 70.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of those same people will attend a larger congregation. So the average churchgoer now is a part of a group of 350 to 360, somewhere in that neighborhood. Now, I've been in churches that size. I've been a senior associate pastor in churches of that size. But where I would say today, my strong point is, number one is my relationship with God. Because Dr. Michael, I want
Right.
to tell you, and I'm not ashamed to say this to those watching, there was a day that my relationship with God was based on getting my next sermon down.
Yeah.
Everything I studied and everything I did, and I still do an excessive amount of studying, but there was a time when that was my relationship. I had to learn to make that secondary, or really not even a top priority at all, and my relationship with the Lord, and then secondarily my relationship with my wife. There's a lot of ministers that are having, and I know people don't know about this. For the most part, I've been in position where I was over a group of churches, or and so on. And I know there's times where pastors were having problems in their marriage.
Yeah.
They were on the verge of separation. My wife and I, when we got married, our first pastor, him and his wife, great people. Ultimately, they were separated and then divorced,
Yeah.
and still haven't reconciled to today, and raised up one of the largest churches in the area that their church is in, and still their marriage ended up in and out of ministry, and in divorce, and so on. I think ministers, and we have to be careful of this. You cannot make yourself to everybody all the time. The truth is, you have to have associates who deal with different groups or portions of the congregation, because you could not literally sit in your office and one right after the other, just like herding cattle through, and just counsel this one, counsel that one, give advice to that one, and find out the next person's problem. Jesus had an inner circle of three.
Right.
Ultimately, he had the 12, and then, of course, the numbers grew from there, meaning that even Jesus couldn't handle the whole load of
No.
ministry by himself. And, you know, I have a doctorate in Christian counseling, and I've been an insured counselor for many years, and but I had to learn that I couldn't take on everybody's situation. Now today, I do not, I get tons of calls by Facebook Messenger videos. I don't answer calls. Okay, I can't. And I know this is going to affect somebody, and somebody's going to take this wrong, but you'll just have to hear this. If I got a messenger video from you, I would take the call. Pastor Tarzi Martin, I would take the call. Dr. Kay Fairchild, I would take the call. And of course, I'm always on with my wife, and we have walkie talkies in
Mhm.
her office to the shop and so on. And so you have to learn to delegate your time.
That's right.
In business school, I wrote a paper on time management. Now, I tell this story for probably 35 years. I've not carried a wallet. In construction, riding in the truck all the time, I can't
Yeah.
stand one in my back pocket. I learned to live out of a day runner.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about as a banker. And, I learned the business system of the day runner. And so I did a paper, a term paper on time management. And this is what I've concluded. It's not about how much you have on your plate that you really believe God has allotted to you, given to you to do. It's how you manage your time. And if you
Right.
don't manage your time well, I'm telling you, people will eat up your time unintentionally just because they want to talk. And
Yep.
if you've ever gotten a call from some countries, I won't even name the country, they are going to call you right in the middle of their prayer meeting, right in the middle of their house meeting. And this is my wife, this is my children, these are my congregation, and meet one individually. And now, would you pray? Would you share a sermon? And what you thought was going to be a 1 or 2 minute call turns into an hour. You
Yep.
can't do that. Folks, learn to delegate your
Right.
time because those are some of the things that create the tension of not having somebody to talk
Right.
to confide in. And it seems like everything's going wrong, and also handling all the finances.
Yep.
Now, I handle the finances for five different our personal and for five different aspects of our ministry. Okay,
Hmm.
we have a lot of things, and it can be a lot if I can't call Dr. Fay on the intercom and say, "Hey, please come in here. I got a problem. I need you to help me. Just hear me out and let me work through this." There's stuff that you have to have somebody you can rely on, and if you don't, then you become one of these statistics of just getting burnout and giving up.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. We got, my associate pastors, everybody may structure them a little differently, but what I do with mine, Dr. Bill, is they all have a portfolio of ministries, and I've sort of moved myself out of managing ministries,
Hmm.
not because I don't think they're important, not because I don't care for them. The
Hmm.
opposite. I do that because, I'm so pulled from place to place at times, I don't feel as though I can do the correct justice to that ministry or that individual. So my associates each have a portfolio of ministries that they're responsible for that reports to them. And if they have a
Yep.
problem, they can bring it to me. But I want them to solve the issues if possible.
Hmm.
If not, then I'll help, of course. But I'm trying to mentor them through the process as well and help them. And in the process, it takes loads off of me. And then plus, in turn, it's a win-win for everyone because that ministry that may not can get to me for certain reasons has an outlet to get to someone.
Yes.
I just moved my wife. We created a position for her, and she is what we refer to as a liaison to the pastor.
Hmm.
So what happens is, youth ministries, our kids ministries, our middle school ministries, they report basically to her. She has her own little portfolio. Then if she has a problem, she can bring it to me, of course. But it spreads that out. It gives them immediate help where they cannot get immediate help that would create
Yes.
frustrations. The frustrations of trickle down effect if we're not careful. And you
Right.
touched on a point there that we haven't even really talked about, which is another whole issue, is not only are ministers struggling and become statistics themselves, but how about the spouses? We haven't even touched on that part.
Yep.
That's a whole nother concept in itself. How many spouses have given up on ministry that creates those divorces and those separations that you talked about. I know a bunch of those as well.
Hmm.
And it's because of the stress and the pressures of ministry. and no outlet and know where to turn, or just maybe not knowing where to turn. And so, at the end of the day, sure, God helps us. At the end of the day, prayer is a game changer at the end of the day. But, God has placed people around us and in our lives to help us. And the delegation part of that is really critical for ministers. Remember, I don't think that goes back to that command and control factor 30 years ago that it's not going to be effective today. It's not going to be
That's
sustainable
right.
because what will happen will wind up being a statistic in these statistics if we don't understand that it should be about collaboration and teamwork, being able to, some ministers, some leaders, Dr. Bill,
Hmm.
can't delegate. They can't delegate. They got
Hmm.
to have their thumb on everything. I know what goes on at our church, believe me, but I don't have to be at every ministry event.
Come
My
on.
wife, we've talked about this with Sandy and I. Sandy can't be at every ministry event women have. I mean, we just can't be. And so, but that doesn't devalue the ministry. You know, we feel confident with ministry leaders can push that forward with or without us. That's where we
Hmm.
got to get to at the end of the day. And that should be one of our ultimate goals. And so I think, and so in leadership, there's ways we can de-stress that. The hope of the matter is this: you're not alone. People are not alone, and there's help out there. There's hope out there. Like when students for I opened a discussion thread in Leadership 408. I'm doing right now this term, Dr. Bill.
Hmm.
I opened a discussion thread in weeks 3 through 5, right? I'm making a point, unless I just miss one accidentally, I'll make it a point, Dr. Bill, to answer every response, no matter what that response is. I'm going to respond to that response. I'm going to reply to that.
Right.
Last term, I think I had on one of those discussions nearly 90 returns and 90 replies. I think is what we wound up with.
Hmm.
But, I don't care how deep the response is or how short or how long. I'm going to respond to that.
Right.
And because some of those are reaching out for help. And so, and ministry isn't just in a pulpit. Ministry is when I'm sitting behind this computer doing schoolwork or teaching a class, WBSU.
Hmm.
Ministry is when I'm on the streets, and doing the things we do in places of business. Ministry isn't just regulated and delegated to the pulpit itself. My pulpit is everywhere as a minister.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
doing what I do and doing what you do. And so there's ways, there is hope. That's my whole point. There is hope. All hope is not lost, and we do not have to be a statistic.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. I was thinking of Acts 18 verse 3. The apostle Paul said this. He says, so because he was of the same trade, he stayed when they with them and worked, for by occupation they were tent makers. Now, here again, if you talk about somebody that was in full-time ministry, the apostle Paul was.
Yep.
um, but sometimes we think that if I have to do a different job, take on extra work because the family's having a hard time, then you think about, well, the ministry's going to have a hard time. Actually, it's not. You do what's right, and let integrity and the ethics side of life be your guide,
That's right.
and things will work out.
Yeah.
We hear so much about Paul being a tent maker. We hear so much about him being bivocational. That wasn't all the time. And I talked to ministers today who some of them are able to apply full time ministry for a little bit, and
Mhm.
then it's bivocational for a little bit. I mean, if
Right.
you have to fluctuate, whatever has to be done, just understand this: if you're a member of a congregation, you are still a full time ministry. If you're sharing Jesus, if you're sharing your smile, if you're, I mean, we've gone into restaurants and just had, I remember one time there was an elderly lady sitting across the room, and my son, who was just barely, I don't know if he was a teenager yet, his heart swelled with compassion, and he said, can I pay for that lady's meal? And so we had her bill added to ours. We've done that on multiple occasions where we paid for someone's meal. Get in a line, pay for someone's groceries, do anything you can do to minister to someone. And quite honestly, if you've got a church that's got 30 or 40 people in it, you may not be getting an adequate salary, but you have a trade. You can do something to bring in income that will help keep the pressure off of your family. And by the way, speaking of congregations of 30, 40 people, it didn't matter what size the congregation was, and we've had different sized churches, but here's what we did. When we would delegate a area of the ministry to someone, here's what we would tell them: this is yours. We're not going to babysit you. We're not going to look over your shoulder. You do the ministry as you feel the calling of God leads you to. But we just have one rule: if you're scheduling an event, we got to know first. It's
Yeah.
got to work into the
Right.
church calendar.
Right.
But other than that, we give, because honestly, coming up, there's times I really would have appreciated having a free hand to
Yep.
do what I was called to do and to show that I could handle my area of ministry. I wasn't always the case back then. Where you talk about ruling. My dad, when he pastored, he ruled with an iron fist.
Yeah.
Okay, it was his way or the highway, and if you didn't think so, he would let you know. We learned how to delegate. We learned that people have value, and we need to let
Right.
them follow through and learn. Are people going to make mistakes? Oh my goodness, people are going to make mistakes. But that's one way they learn. You'd rather they not have mistakes when it comes to your ministry, but they'll learn by that. And there's a way to recover from just about everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, if we, that's right. And we value, we should look at ministry and approach ministry as a calling, not a competition.
Come
And
on.
and because of all these different nuances, Dr. Bill, it's become a competition for many, and that's not what ministry is about. We got to get our eyes focused back on the calling, and it's not I'm not in competition with somebody running 500 or 600 or 300. We got our own church we got to deal with. Now I pray for those people, of course. We outreach and we'll work with those people, of course. But I can't control what happens there.
Hmm.
And there's a value to empowering people like you're talking about. We must empower people to do ministry. If we're going to be successful, I think in the 21st century, we're going to have to learn that word empowerment and
Hmm.
not be afraid to empower the right people. Now,
Come
I've
on.
empowered sometimes the wrong people mistakenly. We have to fix that. But I mean, at the end of the day, we empower people for ministry. That gives them ownership for ministry. It takes away so many frustrations and anxieties. And I, like you, I tell folks when I put them as a director of ministry, listen, I'm not going to micromanage you,
Hmm.
and we expect you to do what you're supposed to be doing. I'll help you. I'm always here to help you. I'm not going to micromanage you,
Hmm.
and basically, if you don't do it, we'll find somebody that will, because at the end of the day, I do it in a loving way. But I mean, at the end of the day, we got to understand and be honest with people and let them know, but let them know that we're empowering them to go do ministry. We're confident that you could do it or you wouldn't be here, right?
That's
Mentality.
right.
And so, we must empower people for ministry. And sometimes we can't delegate that or empower people. And sometimes we wind up becoming a statistic because, in all honesty, sometimes we become our worst enemy
Hmm.
ourselves,
Hmm.
because we can't delegate. We don't, or maybe we don't know how to delegate, or we're afraid to empower people, and I just don't think we can be afraid to empower people. Ministry is not just designed for me. I'm just a steward of what God's entrusted to me. I don't
Yeah,
own the ministry. I'm just a steward of that ministry. And
that's right.
so let's empower others to go help us do what God has called us to do, and view ministry as a calling, not a competition. And there's churches that's bigger than us, gets takes more money than us. But hey, I'm not in competition with them.
That's
I'm,
right.
I'm I'm focused on my communities that we serve, and I'm focused on the kingdom impact of those communities and how we can better the lives of men and women. Through preaching the gospel, through teaching the gospel, through singing the gospel. And how can we do that? How can I empower others to advance the kingdom?
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I agree. I have the same situation. There are schools that are larger than ours. There are schools that are raking in tons of money because they are a tuition school.
Hmm.
But our calling is different. And Dr. Fay and I, okay, so do I believe that ministers should retire? Well, that's a case by case scenario. We are. I just turned 71. We're definitely at retirement age, but we decided to take our retirement years and 50 plus years of ministry and pour our lives back into the
Wow.
world. And sometimes you think, a paycheck would really be nice right now, but for all the hours that we put in. But at the same time, you're reminded of why you're doing what you're doing, and that's what you have to do, folks. Is remember what the Bible says. That Paul said this. He said, "Whatever you do, do all to the glory of God." This when it's all said and done. This is about the Lord. It's
Right.
about how He has influenced your life. And, when it comes to full time or bivocational ministry, just know this that you are called to serve others with the allotted time that you have, whether you're
Mhm.
full time, part time, or even if you're a tent maker like the Apostle Paul. That's cool too, because I know a lot of pastors that work jobs and they have smaller churches, and you do what you do for the Lord, for your family,
Right.
and then to help have a place where people who are entrusted to you can be ministered to.
Right.
So, what a powerful topic tonight,
Yeah.
Dr. Michael, and I really appreciate so much you sharing valuable things on these shows that really help ministers to get from square A to square B and so on.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And if I can say one more thing, I appreciate the opportunity because it is so important. I've lived through some of those frustrations, like most ministers have,
Hmm.
and I want to be free, and I want people to be free at the end of the day.
Hmm.
And so, as we view bivocational and full ministry, full time ministry, listen, both are complementary to each other at the end of the day, and both are expressions of the same calling. Calling
Hmm.
hasn't changed.
Hmm.
You're not half called to be a minister. God never half called us to be ministers. He fully called us to be ministers. And I'll be honest, I'm making less right now than
Hmm.
I've made since I was 25 years old. But can I tell you, I haven't missed a thing, Dr. Bill.
Hmm.
God has always provided for us. Uh, we've had to walk by faith, and that's fine. I'm okay with that because I know that Christ, uh, we put our faith and trust in Him, everything's going to be okay. And so,
Amen.
as prices go up, things go up, cost of living goes up every year almost. Christ hasn't changed. And so, I'm making, like I say, less than I made since I was 25 years old,
Hmm.
probably. But, we hadn't missed anything. And that's not because of us. I'm giving God the glory and God the credit for sustaining us, and it's truly been a walk of faith. And I wouldn't take anything for that journey today because it's through those journeys that God has taught me so many things, and brought to realization so many truths, Dr. Bill. And back to the promises, He'll never leave me nor forsake me, but He'll be with me to the very end. One of my favorite verses in Ephesians 3 and 20 when it says, God is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we could ever ask or think according to the power that worketh in us. You know what that really means to me? To me, it means not only will God meet my needs, but He will exceed my expectations. And can I tell
Always.
you, He has exceeded my expectations, and to Him be the glory.
Amen. Listen, everybody, if you would click like and share, let people know about this broadcast because this is valuable information. Also, we've been announcing, probably will for the rest of this month. If anyone, and it looks like I left part of the message off here, but if anyone would like to help, um, we are at that time of the year. It's the first of the year. A lot of things are due in a tuition-free school. One of the things is our accreditation is due. We have to renew every single year. And if you'd like to give, I have posted some information there in the chat room as well as on my Facebook page. And here's the beautiful thing: you can give, you can not give, one way or another. It'll all work out. We don't want anybody to feel under any obligation, but we want you to be led by Holy Spirit in all that you do. Uh, Also, in the morning, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, Dr. Catherine Toon will be back with me, and we'll be wrapping up a series and getting ready to move to the next series on Friday morning conversations. But again, thank you, Dr. Michael Whitmire. Uh, I have never I just want you to understand our relationship. My wife said, I know this guy, Dr. Michael Whitmire. He wasn't doctor at the time, but Bishop Michael Whitmire, and he would be a great professor over our leadership department. And I always tell her, you know what, you're in charge of the school, you're the managing director, you go with what you and you know what, I have never stepped in, I've never said, hey, professor, you're off on this. I've never interfered. And it's not that I couldn't if it were needed, but
Right.
know those you labor with,
That's right.
know
That's right.
those you can trust, and then let them run with it. I just really appreciate this brother and his wife. We have not met personally. Well, I met her on camera, off camera once, off the internet once, but we've never met in person. But we just really value these people and their integrity and the vision that they have for reaching more and more people for the sake of Christ. Thank you so much, Dr.
You.
Michael, for being on. A lot of
Thank you,
fun
Dr.
tonight.
Bill. Thank you.
You're
It's an
welcome.
honor, and thank you so much for allowing me. And it's an honor and privilege to work with you, both you and Dr. Fay. You guys are awesome. Thank you.
It's a blast. You're welcome. And everybody, have a great night. Thank you for being on, and we will see you on the next show. Bye bye, everyone. Have a great evening.